talking about, I just wanted some context. So Child Protective Services, when we're talking about that normally, that's an agency found in most states that's supposed to be concerned with child abuse, neglect, and family welfare, right? So always when you're talking about system designs, there's an intention behind the system, and sometimes it doesn't actually have the output it's supposed to have, or maybe it's been intentionally designed to have a bad outcome. So I'm not commenting on that. This is just really what Child Protective Services is supposed to be for. It's important to note that every state has different rules, regulations, and even definitions that are used within the system. So there is a federal definition of child abuse, which is right here. But then each state has a specific definition that they may have to add on to that definition. So, for example, here's Indiana. In Indiana, it's considered child abuse when a child witnesses domestic violence between their parents or guardians. And that might not be true in all states, or maybe more in more states. Just as an example, it's not always the same in every state. And normally people, when they think of CPS, they think of somebody reporting a suspected case of child abuse, and then CPS gets involved, and then the protocol and formula starts going to quote-unquote remedy the situation, which we'll talk about. It doesn't always work that way. But there are other ways to get into the system. Okay, and so in the news today, people are talking about family separation at the border, which is an incredibly important issue. But one thing that we hear about is, I can't believe this is happening in America, but it's very American. And I think this issue that we're talking about today is a complete representation of how it is very American to separate families. So we're just going to watch a little bit of this video. And sorry if it's not loud. Oops, sorry everyone. Can anybody not hear this? I know it's really low.
The Trump administration's policy of separating families at the border sparked outrage and may have seemed unprecedented. But throughout American history, authorities have cited a variety of reasons for breaking up families.
The Associated Press explained several times in our nation's history when families were separated, it happened to African Americans during slavery before abolition, Native Americans in the 19th and 20th centuries, Japanese Americans during World War II. Kenneth Davis is the author of Don't Know Much About History, a wonderful series of books. I urge our viewers to check them out. He's joining us here today. Good to see you.
Good morning. I wish you were a happier subject that you discussed.
Yes, indeed. And the way Anne-Marie phrased it, which is that you've heard a lot of people saying on social media, in news, this is not American, this is un-American. In fact, Bruce Springsteen, during his Broadway show on Sunday, said what we're seeing at the U.S. border is un-American. But in this great country that we love, there have been many moments in history when this has happened and passes prologue.
Unfortunately, it has a long and very tragic history, and I don't think there's any history that's more tragic than the notion of the destruction of the family, and we have to start then when we talk about that with slavery. George Washington, the father of our country, auctioned off children away from their parents in 1769. It's documented. Wanted to make money. He had to recover debts from someone, so he sold off children from their parents. That's the father of our country. The famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass talks about in his narrative being taken from his mother when he's 7 months old and really never seeing her again. So this is the history of what African Americans were dealt with, how they were dealt with for centuries in this country, leading in many ways to the destruction of the family. You mentioned the Native American history. That begins primarily as a government function after the Civil War. And it's out of goodness of their hearts, in a sense, that we're going to take the savage away from their terrible circumstances and give them new names, give them haircuts so they look like us, put them in our clothes, teach them English, teach them Christianity so they won't be savage. And that policy continued for 100 years.
Okay, so there is more that we can watch of this, but just so we can get on with the conversation. The idea that this has been around for a long time.
I have a speaker if you want to use it.
Oh, it's okay. It's all right. We won't play it out of it. Thank you, though. So, it's this idea that it's not a new concept that families have been separated in the United States, and for a long time it's become systemized, right? So, it might be an event that has created this family separation emergency, but the idea of family emergency has been created or has been the outcome of the child protection system for a very, very long time, starting in slavery for African Americans. So here is the Minnesota Department of Human Services website, and here they kind of give an overview of child protection in Minnesota, how it's set up. So if you're interested in kind of seeing how the system works, you can check this out. But basically here we have the intention of the Minnesota child protection system, again, responding to neglect and abuse and help support families. That's what it's supposed to do. And then you have the state child protection laws and system, and then you have county and tribal as well. Yeah. Did you raise your hand?
No.
Oh, I thought you were.
Sorry.
Okay. And so you have Hennepin County or Ramsey County, for example. Okay, and so this has been happening for a really long time. I just wanted to highlight something about this concept of separating families and how during slavery, it was children ripped out of parents' arms and being sold to, another slave plantation. So this concept now that the child protection services are doing the same thing, which Kelis will talk about how they would do that. But it's the same concept of kidnapping children, taking children away at a disproportionate rate because, the people who are making the decisions have biases themselves. And then there's several other reasons why that happens. But, finally, parents stood up against this and called it what it is, called it kidnapping, which is different than challenging the rules and procedures just because they're rules and procedures. It's actually putting a name on it and calling it kidnapping. And so this is a lawsuit that was filed by Dwight Mitchell, who's a father. I believe he lives on the East Coast, but for a while he lived in Minnesota. And his 3 children were taken from him for a very long time. One of his children he was unable to speak with, have contact with for 22 months. And in his court complaint, he attached like 80 plus exhibits of documents that have been fabricated by, Dakota County Child Protective Services. They said that he completely abandoned his child, didn't reach out to them, and that was completely untrue. So there are a lot of, like I said, there are a lot of reasons why this happens, but this is one example of a parent standing up and calling it kidnapping, which is what it was. I was going to show the press conference, but I won't do that, but I do just want to show you. This is Dwight. And you can find this video online where he details what happened to him. So if you want to go on YouTube and just search Dwight Mitchell, Child Protection, you can find this. But I won't take up more time in doing that, and I will turn it over to Kelis.
An hour is really not enough time to go through this stuff. There's so much to talk about. Dwight Mitchell spanked his 10-year-old son for stealing. He's a business owner, professional. They really messed with the wrong guy. This has been over for him probably 2 or 3 years, but he's now an advocate. He and I have worked together on different projects. The reason that I have some of the things in my bill, which I'll talk about for an African American Family Preservation Act, to hold child welfare staff accountable, is because of what I've seen as what he described with fabricated evidence to the court, padded petitions, lies in the court orders. We've taken this issue to the county attorney's office, to child welfare officials and admin, and it's fallen on deaf ears. So within my bill, I call for a felony of any child welfare staff that has been found to have intentionally lied on a case, as well as a fine. And I'm getting pushback on that, of course. One of the things that the county said was, well, if we leave that in there, how are we going to get good social workers? Well, good social workers don't lie, right? And it's not for those that may have made a mistake, but it's those that have intentionally lied. Because it happens all the time. I served as a guardian ad litem in Dakota County, a cultural specialist guardian ad litem for 3 years, so I saw it. There were times on record in front of the judge I had to say, Your Honor, that's not true. It happens a lot. So we're trying to implement some solutions specific to what African American parents involved in child protection experience. Okay, I like to provide a general definition so as not to assume that everyone knows what disproportionality is. But it's when the population of children of color in any system, including child welfare, is higher than the population of children of color in the general population. I got started, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I do want to leave room for us to talk about solutions and ways that everyone can get involved, because that's the point of this conference, which I'm so happy about. I would say that I've been doing this for about 6 years now. More than that, if you count the on-the-job activism and organizing that I did. I worked for Hennepin County Central Intake Shelter, and that was, and still is at times, the first stop for children just removed from their parents. And it was there that I saw more often than not that all of the children on the emergency shelter unit would be African American youth. And when they were there, they were with us for much longer periods of time. A lot of them came back to us 3 and 4 times a year before they just aged out of the system without permanency. I held a child welfare conference at Mitchell Hamlin on Thursday, and it was awesome. We got volunteers from Connections to Independence, which is a culturally specific organization run by a Black woman that is my friend. She is serving youth that have aged out of foster care. She's helping them to transition into adulthood. And it was amazing to see that I knew all of the kids that she brought in from my time at this shelter. And I do it for them. And all of them came up to me, thank you. A lot of them call me mom and auntie because that's what we do in our culture. But they came up to me and thanked me, wanted to work with me, were asking for ways to get involved. And that's what keeps me going, because this work is hard, it's traumatizing. I've been doing it as a volunteer. So I haven't been getting paid for this. It's because I saw the trauma that those kids experienced when they were separated from their families that it haunts me enough to kind of keep me going and keep me fueled around reform. So yeah, that's how I got started. So I'm chairing the NAACP Minneapolis Child Protection Committee. I actually started that committee because it's the only one in the country 2 years ago. And my goal is to make it a national committee. So we're talking to some of our national folks about how we expand that to make this work something that we're doing everywhere, because as you see, our children are disproportionately impacted in every state in the country. And this has been the same for longer than I've been alive. So my mentors are Black men and women that have been fighting this for 30 years. So, I mean, it's a long-standing national issue. Disparities exist at every decision point of the child protection process. We're going to review current data, of course, but I like to refer to this one because DHS was quite honest in their reporting on child welfare disparities in this 2010 report. And it's funny, since we've started to raise awareness and talk more about the impact this system is having on our children, the reports are more convoluted, and the data isn't as clear as it used to be. I still analyze it and go through it, of course, but it's not as plainly put as this report is. So I refer to this a lot, so then when we look at the 2016 and 2017 data, we'll see just how far we still have to go. But beginning with reports to CPS, we're disproportionately impacted. So we're reported over 5 times more than white children for neglect reports. African American children, once those calls come in, if it's a Black case, it's 4 times more likely to be screened in. Out of home care, African American children were placed in care over 5.3 times higher than white children. And the longer African American children remained in care, the more they experienced multiple moves and placement settings. And because we're clogging the system with Black children, Black and Native children, there is really a lack of foster home availability in the state of Minnesota. So I would unfortunately see children that I knew on the emergency shelter unit being shipped off to residential treatment facilities because there wasn't really anywhere else to send them. A lot of them ended up in JDC, and we'll see the data on that as well. Children in shelter, I call it a rap sheet that they start to get. So we remove them from their families. They start to have some of these behaviors in shelter because, I mean, you've just taken them out of everything, their community, their family, everything they've ever known. Of course, they start to act out. We have to write incident reports on everything that occurs. So the more incident reports they get when the foster home or possible foster home sees this, they're less likely to want, you know, a teenager that's running away or acting out. Or so it really creates a horrible path for that child as far as like where they'll actually end up. One of my concerns and one of the things that I advocate for is that we start to focus more on the trauma of removal. One thing that we do when we take kids from their homes is give them psych evals, which I think is just horrible to do. So in the midst of the chaos of the removal, they're getting a psych eval. And they're trying to find out what happened in your home that has caused you to now act out or misbehave or have these this depression or whatever it is. But we're not talking about the fact that we just separated that child from their family. So I think a lot of Black kids get misdiagnosed. And kids in general, if you look up the numbers and studies on children in foster care as to the psychotropic drugs that they're given, it's horrible compared to children that are remaining with their biological families. You just don't see it. I had a 5-year-old that was on about 5 different psych meds while he was in care. And when he was returned, of course, they were able to wean him off of that. But yeah, it's horrible.
You said that some children are sent to JDCs. Is that
juvenile detention center? Yes, sorry, you all. Yeah, juvenile detention center. Several components influence disproportionality, and again, it starts with the reports to CPS. Mandated reporters are the highest reporters at 79.8% for 2016, and then 2017 it was about 78%. So it was still pretty high. And school personnel are the highest of those. Every single school in the Minneapolis School District over-reports Black children to CPS, except for one. And the only difference there is that there's a Black social worker. Hennepin County Attorney's Office actually called me in to look at the data and to talk about an initiative that they were starting in order to address the disproportionate calls that they were getting. I don't know where they are in that, but I was thankful that they were at least trying, because the more calls you get, the greater likelihood that you'll be screened in or assigned to investigation. And that's on top of the bias that is there itself as to what track you'll be placed on. So just to provide one example, this was one of the most egregious. There was a school with a 16% African American student population. They made 145 calls in 2016 to child protection. 130 were on Black children. Is your hand up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What, could you tell us what that pilot program is called?
I don't know.
Okay.
It was an initiative, and I think I don't know if they
So
actually named it.
So it's not PSOP?
No. So it was the actual county attorney via school program.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thank you.
Once a report is received, CPS workers determine whether a family is assigned to a family investigation or assessment. 60% of our cases that come in are assigned for discretionary reasons. So that means that there was no actual claim or allegation of a mandatory reason, but it was, this kind of sounds funny, let's pull it in. It was at the subjectivity of the person taking the call, which is horrible for Black people, because we are already seen in the negative stereotype. There's a lot of biases around that, so that subjectivity leaves room for disproportionality, and that's what we're dealing with. And discretionary reasons include a frequent history of child maltreatment reports. So again, all those calls that are coming in, but then also the caretaker appeared to be unwilling or unable to achieve child safety. I hate that type of language, appear to be unwilling or unable. According to whom? There's really no solid standards in child protection, and that's part of the reason that we see what we're seeing.
Could you just clarify, are these statistics from Minnesota or?
These are Minnesota statistics.
Thank you.
Everything we see from this point on will be Minnesota.
Okay.
The first one was just the national disproportionality rates. What else was I going to say about this one? I usually use notes, so forgive me. We can move. Oh, so family investigation. Why this is important. Family investigation is a very punitive track. So it includes a maltreatment finding and court involvement. And I've had so many parents and even grandparents lose their daycares, their nursing licenses. We have a grandmother that was a nurse for 35 years, and she's no longer able to practice because of this maltreatment finding. The track, the investigation track, is very punitive. The assessment track is like kind of voluntary. You follow through with it or not. It's really up to you. But with the investigation, you have no choice. You're in court, and it most likely leads to a maltreatment finding. And that loss of employment, loss of businesses leads to, or can lead to a loss of housing. So we're creating a cycle of future child welfare involvement because of that. Once maltreatment has been substantiated, white families are more likely to receive services that allow their children to remain in the home, while African American children are removed from theirs. And this is in face of the same or alleged or very similar offenses, and most of the time less egregious allegations. Our children are between 3.1 and 4.8 times higher than their white counterparts to be removed from home. So what I didn't say is that there's 2 or more races category that we see here. Over 50% of the children in that category have a black parent. So keep that in mind when you're looking at child welfare data. Always pay attention to the category 2 or more races, as well as African American, because a large bulk of our kids are thrown in there, and this skews the data about how many of our kids are actually involved. And just to provide, go ahead.
Quick clarifying. When you say removed from their home, does that automatically mean like termination of parental rights?
No.
Okay.
No, and we'll talk about that too. You have to go through. So once they're placed on this child welfare track, they get this 6 to 12 month permanency timeline. The permanency timeline is horrible. So they get 6 to 12 months to really fix whatever issue brought the case in. So if it's opioid use, and this is harmful for families of all races, right? So if you're struggling with an addiction, who do you know can get clean in 6 months? Who do you know that can get clean in 12 months? We have enough research that shows that it takes at least 2 to 3 times for a person to like really kick it. And we're giving them 6 to 12 months once the case is in court to get the case to kick the, what do they call it? Kick the habit? Yeah, whatever. And then just to provide a quick example of this, so I was assigned to 2 cases, 1 white, 1 black. They still really bother me. The young African-American mom had just had twin babies. She was walking home from wherever she was. She was living with a relative. It was a really hot day. She was locked out. She got home, couldn't get in her home. She sat on the front porch. The kids became overheated. Aunt finally arrived. They rushed the kids in, put cold compresses on them to get their body temperatures down, but someone had already contacted CPS and the police. The kids were removed. It took her about 2 years to get the kids back. Even with her mother driving here from out of state for every single hearing, asking to get involved, asking to take her grandchildren, she was not allowed to. It wasn't until about a year of her traveling back and forth here that she finally just up and left where she lived and came here, got a place, and moved her daughter in, and continued to fight, and eventually they were reunified. But the kids were walking and talking, and and they were taken at infancy. On the flip side of that, Caucasian mom using a illegal substance in the car, got into an accident. Police arrived, helped her get her car free. Knew that she was using because it was in the reports that she was using. But her child wasn't removed. It wasn't until her 3rd or 4th DUI with the child in the car that her child was finally removed from her. And she actually got her back a lot sooner than did the black mom. And it was seeing this cycle over and over again in the courts, and then hearing about it. I advocate for families on an individual basis now as well. So I'll go to court with them, help them through their case plan, just whatever the need is, and I see it within that as well. Casey Family Programs and national research studies show that actually that African American families and communities actually have lower rates of child maltreatment than white families, after controlling for such factors as income level, unemployment, and location. our communities have very low rates of child maltreatment, and that's true in Minnesota as well. And then across races, there aren't a lot of child protection cases that are coming in for actual abuse against kids, whether physical, sexual, or egregious harm. And we kind of saw that in the data around the reason that the cases are being screened in. So 60% of our cases are screened in for discretionary reasons, meaning there was no allegation of abuse, whether physical or sexual, compared to the Caucasian community. 39% of their cases are screened in for discretionary reasons. The rest are mandatory, like they have no choice but to screen it in. So we see the bias there. Two facts reveal a contradiction. There's no difference in the likelihood that a parent will neglect a child. There is a great difference between races that a child will be removed from home and placed in foster care. Eric Dean is very well known in the child welfare realm, but for those that are not aware of him, he was a young man, God bless his soul, who his daycare providers and concerned familial supports and community members called Child Protection 15 times to say Eric is being abused in his home. The cases, they would come in, they would close them if they went to the home at all. And when they did, I think the last time that they went, they just closed the case at the assessment point. But he was never removed, and he was subsequently murdered by his stepmother. And in cases involving African American parents, the exact opposite is true. So far less egregious allegations, and our kids are removed at the first call, after the first call. The risk assessments that are supposed to take place to determine if there's an imminent harm, risk or threat of harm present in the home to really support that removal doesn't happen. So I always say disproportionality is not a black problem. When racial bias guides our decision making, all kids are left in harm's way. We're virtually clogging the child welfare system with black parents, black fit parents, and we don't have the resources or energy to really protect the children that actually need it. So it's an issue that we should all be concerned about. Start to deter families that are not involved with child protection for actual abuse to community programs and actual meaningful and concrete services so that we have room for those that need protection. So child protection can do what it was designed to do.
Right.
2016, we were 3.1 and 4.8 times more likely than white children to be placed in foster care. The rights of African American parents are terminated at higher rates, so that's what Natasha was asking about. So once they're on that track and they reach that timeline, our parents are more likely to receive a termination of parental rights than white parents. And I saw this a lot in my work as a guardian ad litem, and I would have to ask the judge, because it falls on deaf ears unless you do it on record. So I always tell parents, anything you have to say, always put it on record in front of the judge, because that matters. But I would have to ask, why are we recommending a TPR opposed to a TLC? There's no abuse. Mom just hasn't finished treatment yet. She's trying. It may have taken her a little while to get started and get going, but she's trying. I actually did that for a white mom, and she was, it took her a while to finally agree to go to treatment, but she did. And so at her termination hearing, I said no, and I asked the judge for an extension for her for 3 months to let her get through treatment, and the judge agreed with me, and I paid for that for a long time, but I was glad that I did, because I know that she loved her kids. I know that her kids loved her. They were suffering, especially her oldest, with mental health issues and anger and different things like that once he was separated from his mom. But it's hard to challenge the status quo, but it's worth it because people's lives are at stake. So I always remind myself of that. I'll take the L or take the hit in order to do the right thing. The system is wrong. Slavery was law. I mean, this is another form of it. Were we not supposed to challenge it? You know what I mean? Because I get that a lot. Well, it's the law. Well, it's not right and it's harmful. So, and I'm sorry, a transfer of legal custody allows for that parent to transfer custody to a relative or whomever, but then in 2 years, they can come back and petition the court for a reinstatement of their rights with the termination of parental rights. So Tuesday is a really big day on the Capitol, and I'll talk about that, but Senator Champion has a bill to reinstate parental rights because of the bias that has occurred with families of color and the TPRs, and how we still have so many kids languishing in foster care. They haven't been adopted.
Right.
They're in jail. They're all over the place. Some are out of state. Why aren't we looking back at that family to see what's going on and reconnecting them? And under our current law, the Reunification Act that was put in place by Governor Dayton, only the county attorney can petition the court to reinstate parental rights. The county attorney's office has petitioned the court for 0 reunifications, but they're challenging Senator Champion's bill. That's why we need the community in an uproar about this. It's not talked about as much, and it's not as public because these are not white children that are suffering. I was already at the Capitol advocating around child welfare disproportionality and disparities when Eric Dean was murdered. All of a sudden, there was an influx of people talking about the reform that needed to take place around child welfare, but they still were not talking about black and brown babies. And the result of his death was a 50% increase in out-of-home placement of black and native children. And they're still telling us it's getting better, even though, as we'll see, the majority of the kids that they're taking are our babies.
Did you say that NCAA opposes Senator Champion's bill?
Yes. Well, they've argued against it. I don't know where they are now, but it'll be introduced in the House on Tuesday at 2 p.m. If folks can get there. It's a great bill. I have a mom that I've been advocating for a while. Her son found me and asked for help. He's 16. He had been in 20 different placements since he was taken from her at the age of, I believe, 10 years old. This last time I met him again, I knew him when he was first removed. So adorable, so cute, just well-mannered, cute little dimples. Can I help you with this, Miss Kelis? Can I help you with that? Like, you knew his mom was doing a great job with him. He found me at 16, no longer looked like that little baby. The system had really roughened him. And he was telling me that he was removed from a foster home, and I saw him in 2017, I'm sorry. I'm getting my years mixed up, I'm sorry. Some of this stuff is like just, but he was telling me that he was removed from a foster home a year prior and for abuse. And because they couldn't find anywhere else to send him, they put him back in the foster home that abused him. And so when I met him again, he was in shelter. And he said, please get a hold of my mom. She's been fighting. She never stopped fighting for her kids. I met mom, read through all the case files and everything. There was no risk or threat of harm present in the home. That's documented in the county's documents, that there was no risk or threat of harm present in the home, yet they removed all 5 of her children. The youngest 3 were adopted out. The oldest 2 are still languishing in foster care. She doesn't know where her daughter is, but she's still in foster care. So she got an attorney that she couldn't afford. The attorney sent the letter and request to the county attorney's office for them to do a reinstatement. County attorney's office adamantly said no and was rude about it too. Wouldn't even review it or think about it, just no. I, as an NAACP rep, reached out to the county attorney's office, reached out to DHS, reached out to county admin, anyone I could. Hey, this mom never abused her kids. She just didn't get through the case plan in a way that was pleasing to the social worker, and they moved towards a termination. No, it's falling on deaf ears. We need Senator Haven's bill. We need the African American Family Preservation Act to help combat these things. I have a piece in my bill as well for a reinstatement of parental rights, and it would give any party to the case the freedom or right to petition the court for a reinstatement. And that doesn't automatically say, oh, you get your rights back, but it now at least is in front of the judge again. We're reviewing this case. It's open again. Is it appropriate to get these kids back home? Especially when we consider the number of them that are still in foster care and state wards. And can you imagine your own kids being separated from you, right. 2, 3 years old, and the only support they have is a system of people, a social worker that sees them once a month, a guardian ad litem that sees them once a month, their shelter staff, a foster. We're placing them with strangers. And God bless foster parents, but they're still strangers. And there is nothing in our law that says we're supposed to be cutting the kids off from their entire family just because a mom or dad got a TPR. It's a bad practice amongst counties. It is not law. They can still have visitation, they can still go to their church home, they can still be connected to their basketball coach, but we're cutting all ties with these kids. And then we're wondering why they're on whatever they're on, however they're acting out, but this is what we're doing to them. And what I'm trying to do is unveil what's actually occurring in child protection. It happens because not a lot of people, I made the assumption before I started in this work that any parent that was involved with child protection deserved to be involved. I just made this assumption that, I mean, it's a system that's working right. I mean, how could you get the attention of child protection if you weren't abusing your kids? It wasn't until I started my advocacy work and really got to know the parents and the kids and started to read through case files that I saw that that was absolutely not the case. In 2017, of the 1,610 children removed in Hennepin, 616 were African American, 407 in the 2 or more races category. In Ramsey, 1,566 place, 590 African American, 294 in the 2 or more races category. The African American Family Preservation Act would work to protect all children of African descent, including those of 2 or more races. So white mothers raising black and brown children, this would work to protect your children as well. A lot of people don't know that your rates are actually higher than ours. We talk a lot about the school-to-prison pipeline, but a foster care to prison pipeline exists as well. African American children are the highest population moving from child protection to juvenile detention. So we're taking kids for so-called abuse or neglect, and then sending them in jail ultimately. So there's a lot of system overlap that occurs, unfortunately. And I'm just trying to get the message across that we're doing it wrong. Take a real look at the data. Consider the number of families across races that are actually being involved in child welfare for abuse. It's really low. So in 2016, 27% of the cases were involved for parental substance use, and 21% for so-called neglect. And neglect is this horrible statute that I call a catch-all statute. So when you can't really call it abuse, you call it neglect. And that can mean inadequate food, clothing, or shelter. So we're placing parents that have a lack of resources on the same track as we are a mother who left her infant in a car overnight or left her kids at home to fend for themselves. And another problem with it is that no matter what the case comes in for, the case plan is the same. No matter what the case comes in for. So we're not assigning meaningful or concrete services to these families at all. And I can name it to you because I mean they're all the same. Rule 25, so you do an assessment to see if you're on drugs. A mental health assessment and psych eval. Weekly UA, so you're going to do a drug test. Even if there's been no allegation of your drug use, if you're black, you're more likely to be sent to do a drug test. I had to ask in court, like one time, we had a dad that was driving here from like South Dakota to get involved in the case because his girlfriend or baby mom had gotten involved with CPS and he wanted to intervene. And they were automatically talking about a drug test, and he was taking off from work to come here from South Dakota, and I had to ask, why are we asking him to do a drug test? Why? And the judge agreed. But there's a lot of bias, and the stereotypes that we have to live with, the labels that we have to live with in this country really impact our experiences and outcomes in these different systems. Yes, sorry. Okay. So we all have a stake in ensuring our system is fair and equitable. We called on our elected officials to support the following legislative action: the implementation of the African American Family Preservation Act. And I really had to cut this presentation down so I didn't get to all the good nitty-gritty stuff, but I'm hoping that this painted enough of a picture for you to really support the efforts that the Black community is really trying to implement to address the issue. One thing that we've been asking our white allies to do and those working for and within our communities is to step back and let us lead on the issues and policies and practices that impact our community most. And Rena Moran made a great comparison to families in the rural counties. We could not go into those homes as city and urban folks and assess them. We don't know, I have no idea what goes on a farm, you know, or how, and it's the same thing. You can't come into these communities and you have no cultural context to refer to and assess them, let alone apply meaningful resources and intervention and engagement. So just step back, let us do this. The act really works to And I used feedback from the youth that I work with, the families that I work with, the professionals that I work with, and I made sure that it was African American because it's our community that's most impacted. But we did get feedback, and we tried to address disparities at every decision point and make sure that, and it's not anything that they shouldn't be doing for all kids, right? So making sure that we're looking for the non-custodial parent right away, making sure that if we can, replace them with the non-custodial parent, making sure that if the non-custodial parent is unavailable, that we're looking for relatives or kin to place with. Allowing for families that have kids that are languishing in foster care to come back to the system and petition for reinstatement of parental rights. Just natural things that we should be doing to preserve families, and not just the black family. I wish I could fight for all kids, but right now black children are the ones drowning. And I tell folks, once I get them out of the water, I can come back and work with everyone else. But right now they're the ones drowning. Tuesday is the African Heritage Day on the Hill. We invite all allies and supporters to join us, and this is led by the Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage, who have been great supporters of my work. We'll hear 3 bills that day. My hearing is at 6 p.m. It's kind of a big deal because we're doing something that hasn't been done before. So Rena wanted to make sure the community was able to show up for that. But it'll be at 6 p.m. in room 200 of the state office building on Tuesday.
This Tuesday.
This Tuesday. It's coming up fast. And then Wednesday, the Senate hearing will be held at 3 p.m. And we don't have a room number yet, but you can show up at the Senate office building and they'll point you to the hearing.
You say the Senate office building or the state office building?
The
Where
first one, yes sir. So the state office building is 100 Rev. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. And it's in room 200 there. And if you put state office building in your GPS, it'll take you there. And then the Senate office building is not far from there, and that's like 95 West University in St. Paul. And that one is at 3 p.m. Did you?
Yeah, and I just wanted to point that because the Sears is closed, you can park in the Sears parking lot, and you can just walk across the street. Otherwise, you're not gonna find parking.
That's great to know. Thank you, because I always park in the street and chance.
I just want, what a great presentation by both of you. Really appreciate it, and I'm so glad to hear you say to white allies, please step back. I mean, for 40, 50, 60, 80 years, we've been up there saying we know what's best, and we have really mucked it up. I have a couple of questions about the Family Preservation Act. I think one of the things, from what I can see, that really hurts the CPS system is how it allows so much discretion, imminent danger. I've seen kids taken out of homes because their parents were gay and lesbian. I've seen kids taken out of homes because they didn't like the way they were dressed, even though they were clean. I've seen kids taken out of homes, you know, because they were eating pickles in the morning and not cereal. I mean, stuff that was just ludicrous. So the other thing I think really hurts is that, and I don't know why it works in Minnesota as much as it does in California and Maryland where I've practiced, is do parents and guardians who have their children taken away have the right to an attorney? Because in California, when I worked for the public defender's office and I was assigned to the juvenile court, at one point I worked in the dependency side of it, and I could be assigned to represent the child, a caretaker, a parent, a grandparent. They all had representation. I'm not saying it was always great. Whereas here in Minnesota, the families that I've helped out pro bono, the parents, it seems that they always have to hire their own attorney.
They have to apply unless they make too much money. So I have had moms that didn't meet the qualifications for a public defender, but most of them are automatically assigned. In my opinion, too late. I think they should be assigned at the EPC hearing.
Exactly.
At that first hearing.
Right.
They don't know what to do. They're coming in alone. Their kids have been taken.
Right.
There's no attorney to explain it to them. I'm trying to do as much as I can as a guardian. I'm supposed to do work for the best interest of the child, but I'm trying to tell the parent like how to understand what's going on. There's no one there for them.
Right.
So yeah, they do get that option here, but it's, in my opinion, it's too late. So it's usually at that first appearance, which happens 7 days after the EPC.
Right, and the threshold for a public defender in Minnesota is so, I mean, you have to be very, very poor to be able to be assigned a public defender in Minnesota. So.
And the non-custodial parents oftentimes don't.
And I'm wondering if a constitutional amendment to the state constitution, or at some point the federal constitution, because we have a right to due process if life, liberty, and property is taken from us, but not our children. I mean, just think of the parent, and that comes out of that came right out of the slaveholder mentality, right? So the notion that you could separate families was something that they did not want to have to be challenged in a constitution. So I think due process needs to extend to life, liberty, property, and the children that we care for, with the assumption being that yes, we want to protect children, like you said, get back to the original intent. But if whatever the imminent danger or the discretionary thing has to be laid out, I'll just give an example. When I did dependency court for the first time, I had no prep, nobody prepared me, I got no training, I was thrown into it. I had 360 cases for the afternoon. This is in Oakland, California. And one after another, the county prosecutor would get up and say, request a continuance, and I was supposed to say, I went along with it. And I would just say no.
Right.
And that the master said, but Ms. Gurian Sherman, you will hold up the court for days. And I said, these are my clients. I don't know. You have to state a credible reason for a continuance.
Right.
I'm looking at a file that's been continued 6 or 8 times.
Right.
And that is the problem, is that we overwhelm the system so it can't possibly work.
It can't possibly work. And they complain about the social worker turnover. They complain about the lack of foster home availability, but they won't stop taking children. Stop taking so many children. Right. We have protective supervision as a tool, and it's underutilized in cases involving Black families and families of color. And this happens to a lot of different races if you're not white. I'm just focusing on Black folks because it's disproportionately impacting us. But protective supervision is absolutely something that we can implement. You would still have social workers assigned, you would still have guardians assigned, you would still have eyes on that child to make sure he or she is safe, but you're not tearing them away from the home. So if anyone is working in the child protection system, I always tell them, challenge the status quo, push back on some of the recommendations of the county, don't let it walk. A lot of times they're just going through the motions because they're overwhelmed and so many cases are coming in. So there's no individuality in those cases to ensure the family is actually getting meaningful engagement and intervention. But I would love to talk to you if I can get your card before I leave. So I'm preparing my argument for the hearing, and in my opinion, they are violating our due process rights and equal protection under the law, and so I'm forming my argument for that based on what I've heard as DHS is in some of the county's challenges on my bill.
So what I will say is that I'm going to post this PowerPoint. Kelis has to leave exactly at 11:15, so I just want to say I'm going to post this PowerPoint which has Kelis's contact information and mine here, and then Kelis's slides again. And then I'll also post on our min by min session page. That's what I'm talking about.